One. Okay, we are live streaming now, and thank you guys for coming to the meeting this evening. I blocked an hour only because Zoom only lets you block in 30-minute increments or 60-minute increments, but I don't anticipate us being on that long together today. I say that with a grain of salt, though, because our group has a way of, really discussing things deeply. So we only have one agenda item, but before we begin that, I have two public comments to read. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. The first one is from Brandon Dorsey, a 20-year veteran educator and FUSD parent. Dear LCAAC Committee, I submitted my application to be on the LCAAC Committee on April 19th, 2020. Since then, I have only received an email that my application has been received. Will this application be taken to the Board of Trustees? If so, when? I realize the application lists Board Policy 4112.8 referencing nepotism. However, the Board of Trustees did not make the determination in the LCAAC bylaws they adopted. From my research, the state of California does not require this either. I would really like the opportunity to be appointed. My historical knowledge alone is invaluable to FUSD and this committee. Thank you, Brandon Dorsey. The second public comment, this does not have somebody's name attached to it, so I'll just read it. LCAAC, thank you for your work advancing the interests of FUSD students. Your work is very much appreciated. Given that the purpose of the committee is to reflect the views of parents and other community members, I do not understand why your most recent meetings have been held during the typical workday. Please consider holding your meetings in the evening moving forward. Thank you in advance. So there we go. Okay, what we are meeting about today is LCAP surplus funds for 2019-2020. So this year's funds that are dropping to the bottom line that need to be spent down by June 30th. These are not expenditures that we have in place for next year. We did that separately at our last meeting on May 11th. This is for originally the 1.2 million that was dropping to the bottom line. We started the conversation in February.
To develop that plan, and then if I need more resources, better give it to me. You can't say that.
If somebody has their mic on and there's a recording in the background, if you could mute yourself, that'd be great. Okay, so the money that was dropping to the bottom line that we shared was originally 1.2. When we did the final allocations for the LCAP annual update, it dropped to a little over $1 million. Then we had proposals from both instructional services and from FUDTA reps that came to meetings in February and March. And we voted at that time for roughly a professional development day for FUDTA, SEIU, and CSEA to the tune of about $500,000, which we had set aside. And then we also purchased the Chrome carts for 9th grade science or 9th grade health classes because they were aging and needed replacement. And so much of that curriculum is done online. And then we also purchased responsive teaching toolkits for our benchmark English language arts curriculum for the elementary levels. And then at our last meeting, we authorized and approved about $350,000 worth of expenditures for summer school this year in a digital platform. And that was broken down to $30,000 for a professional development day, $120,000 for 2 work days, $200,000 for technology and licensing that we needed for a digital online framework. And then Benchmark ran us about $68,000, and the Chrome cart purchase was about $125,000. Leaving us with a total of $543,000 over that 1 million-ish mark for surplus monies dropping to the bottom line. That was allocated for the PD day. We've been meeting since February, late February, early March. starting to work on what the dynamics of that PD day would look like. And if you recall, originally it was for PBIS and restorative practices. We were going to be launching into a 9 elementary school cohort for the spring. And we're also going to be revisiting restorative practices, which is a great counterpart for our secondary sites in terms of climate and culture building. I shared with you on May 11th that we were having a hard time getting any kind of outside vendors to come in and do a digital workshop for things like climate and culture building, when those things, the presenters that we had reached out to felt those needed to be done in person. So we met last Friday, and the turnaround on this is really quick. We had members from CSEA, FUDTA, and instructional services who would really be working with the planning committee to get this PD day off the ground. We invited SEIU, but they were not in attendance. And we started talking about some of the hurdles that we were experiencing. At that point, we had said that it's a heavy lift to do this internally for our own instructional services team. It would really fall on our student support services department to try to handle the shift that we were thinking around mental health and wellness, and then having time to plan and collaborate for the rest of the day. When we started really talking about it further, there seemed to be a general feeling that this is probably not the best way to spend the money. And this was the planning committee that was coming together. And there are a couple of people that attended that meeting that are here today. I'll let them speak about it in a minute. But the long and short of it is that they wanted me, the planning committee, felt like it was important to come back to LCAAC and say, is this the right time to try to squeeze in a professional development day when we're in the middle of a lot of transition and change? And would the money be better spent looking at something different, like assuming a general fund expenditure that would alleviate the general fund, but still serve our unduplicated students to the best of our ability? Given the fact that we're in this COVID-19 situation with distance learning causing us lots of expenditures that we hadn't anticipated, given the May revise from the governor's budget, the committee felt like the timing might be appropriate for us to come back to LCAAC and say, can we not have a professional development day, but instead earmark something different? And my response to that was, there's lots of things that we could do differently for it, but we have to make sure that this is something that's okay with LCAAC, because this body approved that professional development day for our unions. So I'm gonna go to, let's see, from instructional services, I have Steve Musto and Robin Surt and Kim Kelly here with us. And then from CSEA, Joyce was in the meeting. She's here with us today too. So would any of you like to speak on behalf of what transpired in that meeting on Friday?
I can speak for student support, well, not for student support services, but what they shared, which was that it was very challenging to find, initially they had a trainer set up to come in, but due to the circumstances of the school closure, they were not able to find a trainer to be able to present like we wanted to. Greg and the department then went to the counseling staff to see what they could put together, and they were having some challenges getting counselors willing to put on the professional development that we were looking for. So I think staffing and availability was a concern from that side of that presentation.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else want to speak on behalf of what happened in our planning meeting?
I can go, if that's okay.
Joyce, sure.
So if anybody knows me, they know that PD for classified is always something I've talked about. I was setting on making that clear last Friday, and as the conversations transpired and some assurances from the special ed department as it relates to the kind of training we were looking for, that might be offered to us in August. CSEA felt that, like a lot of people at that meeting on Friday, that the drop down money, I know I probably say that wrong, but might be in the current situation. We CSEA concluded that we agreed with things that Greg Bailey and Student Support Services and things that Kim Kelly had talked about. So we felt like it was better spent on things that might not be PD for that day. I believe there was an issue with purchasing more technology for students. And so CSEA came away from that meeting knowing that the only thing we probably would trade in for PD would be something that supports our students. So that's why I wanted to be here tonight, to make sure you guys understood that's what CSEA believes today. So thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I see Victoria's hand up.
Thank you, Debbie. I actually had my hand up just as secretary from earlier, so we might circle back to it. We can circle back to it at the end as a committee regarding our start times. So we'll table that for now, since we're well underway in this discussion. I guess from the FEDTA perspective, I do want to voice concerns that the FEDTA members that we had in that planning committee were not invited. And I know they would have loved to share this evening. So if that was extended to others, I would appreciate that FEDTA is included next time. I was able to debrief a bit. And from the FEDTA perspective, I wanted to share that Elizabeth Long, our Instruction and Professional Development Chair, and Jenny Inman, who was assisting with this, were still very much in favor of having this professional development. They appreciated what Kim Kelly shared, and that her department was able to pull off a virtual PD, and in fact 4 PD days with a similar amount of notice. And if needed, our FEDTA leaders and through the Instruction and Professional Development Committee was willing to take on a lot of tasks, and they appreciated from Debbie's side the invitation to some of these directors meetings and planning meeting. So they had felt they were already quite a bit underway there. Regarding what was shared on the counseling staff, I had reached out to Greg Bailey and asked, since I had not been included on that, what the outreach was to counselors to offer them, pay for that additional prep work, and to let them know that they would be paid for that facilitation, in addition to, of course, the per diem pay that everyone would receive for the additional work on June 12th, as was this group's recommendation. And he was unable to provide that for me. So I have a lot of concerns that the recommendations of this committee, which are supposed to go to the school board, are getting stopped at district management. And then, and forgive me, because I'm just a big Robert's Rules person, the committee already voted to have this recommendation, and then the chair is bringing it back to have us have a different recommendation, when I still haven't seen LCAAC recommendations go to the board for a vote. And I think we all understand that we will make recommendations that the school board decides are not the direction they want to go, and that can certainly happen. But looking at the recommendations that we have made, this one professional development day only being one piece of that. Another, key pieces were incentives for special educators and paraprofessionals for retention for our students. A lot of those components, I have not seen any of those go to the school board, nor are they listed on the school board agenda board presentation for Wednesday. And so I just want to be sure that our recommendations are being taken through the process with fidelity, without kind of getting stopped and then coming back to us in this format.
So I can assure you that I'm not stopping anything that this committee recommends going forward to the board. I've shared with the board with transparency any of the surplus items that the group voted on. And that was shared almost immediately after our meetings in late February and early March. But I know that you can certainly understand too, Victoria, that the world has changed considerably since March 13th, and everybody is doing the best that they can to move forward in this new realm and trying to do what we can for the good of all of our students. The monies that get dropped to the bottom line do not have to go before the board for approval. It's not part of the LCAAC process. The board, it's important for them to know about it. And so the board did receive an update about all of this in a summary form from me, but it does not have to go into a public meeting where there is an actual vote. The board votes on the final LCAP that in years past has been submitted at the last board meeting in June. And then if amendments come to it, the governing body that oversees that is LCAAC. So I've not stopped any information going forward to the board. They've heard all of it. They've heard even the things that we couldn't do, such as signing bonuses or pay increases on the salary schedule due to LCAP regulations in terms of our unduplicated count numbers in Fremont. So they've received all of the information that you've put out there. Greg Bailey did talk to me and he said he doesn't have, you asked for emails from him between him and the counselors. He explained to me that he didn't have emails between himself and the counselors because he meets with the counselors in a Zoom meeting weekly. So he doesn't have an email trail of inviting them to present, but he was sharing verbally what their concerns were about presenting to their unit members in an area that they didn't feel they were prepared enough for, and that they're struggling with themselves. So I hope that that addresses what you put out there. I see that Michael has his hand up. So Mr. Gardner.
Oh, I thought my dad was behind me. I'm Michael. He's Mr. Gardner. All right. It's actually just a question. Is if we did spend and plan to do the training like we had originally planned a while back, but it just didn't happen because it can't, what ends up happening to that money?
Great question. That's what this group would talk about. I have an idea to present to you. We can also share further ideas within this group. We basically have the same pot of money, and that money has to be divided up in any specific way. It's the same amount though. Joyce had mentioned earlier in her comment that technology is going to be a huge lift for the district. We've gotten some relief monies to handle that, but it probably won't be enough, especially if we go into a distance learning model in the fall. We are going to essentially have to be one-to-one for 35,000 students. So that's certainly an area where we can earmark the monies. And technology was something that we agreed upon back in February when we were talking about surplus monies, but that would be at the bottom of the ask, and that other things would take priority. So it's something we have agreed upon in the past that we could trade out for that professional development day. I'm gonna go to Kim. Kim, did you put your hand back down? Okay, did you want to talk?
Excuse me, I was glad to ask. I'm sorry, this is not COVID-19, I promise. I was just going to add to a little bit about the conversation about the PD, but it sounds as if maybe the conversation has moved on to other ways we could use the money, which is why I took my hand back down.
No, I think it's appropriate for you to go ahead and talk about that, as it was listed in the conversation that Victoria brought up in terms of what your department did and how it was handled and transpired. And if you wanted to talk about that still, I don't think it's out of place.
Sure, absolutely. And of course, I like a lot of us here, am a firm believer in professional development. So my thought that the best use of this money might not be for professional development is in no way a reflection of the fact that I don't think professional development is valuable. But I do think there are a tremendous number of unanswered questions about what next year is going to look like. And I hate to have us spending time this year without those answers in place, maybe just getting worried and concerned and not being able to necessarily move forward. The thing that made our PD days so successful was we had a very clear charter. We needed to help all the teachers in the entire district begin to figure out how to deliver distance learning. It was clear what we needed to do. I also have a bigger staff really than what Greg is working with, and my people are professional trainers. That's what they do all day, every day. And yet it was still an amazing Herculean task to pull together the PD days that we pulled together. So just the logistics of pulling this day together, as it's this ever shifting sands, right? It was going to be PBIS. It can't be that now. It was going to be restorative practices. It can't be that now. So I feel like we're looking for a way to have PD, but like I said, I'm just not completely convinced that right now, this is the best use of these funds, which in no way says once we know where we're going, we absolutely are going to need PD. I just don't know that now's the timing for it.
Thank you. I see Trustee Crosby's hand up, and then I'll go back to Victoria.
Thank you. I think Kim may have answered my question. My concern was what the professional development was going to be around, because I'm starting to feel like I wasn't understanding what the plan was. And also, I think when you're thinking about professional development versus other things, I think the timing of that professional development is really important, so that having had that type of thing in my career, being able to apply it immediately, I think is really important, because that's how you end up not being forgetful and remembering what it is that you're trying to apply and finding out immediately kind of where you have sticking points so that you can go back and ask for supports. So I just wanted a clarification on that. Also, Debbie, can you remind everyone about the function of being able to raise a hand within the participants? Because
Sure.
I fear that maybe somebody, not everyone knows that, and it would make it so that they aren't able to.
Sure. In the buttons on the bottom of your screen, on the bottom of your grid, you can go to the participants tab, and there you are able to raise your hand and also mute or unmute yourself. So thanks for that reminder, Trustee Crosby.
Debbie, would you like me to monitor that list?
Yeah,
like I did last meeting? Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Victoria Burbeck-Herrera is next.
Okay, and then Ivy.
Yeah, I think Ivy was in front of me, but she wasn't using the thing. It's okay. Why don't we let Ivy go, because she hasn't spoken yet on this.
Yeah, I'm new to this thing, so I don't really know how to. I just raise my hand, or I just try to. But anyway, are we still talking about the 500,000? We're talking about $500,000 right here, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm all for professional development, but we need to spend this money by June 30th. Mm-hmm. And I think what is really critical is the needs of the students. Mm-hmm. What is the best way to help these students? The students who are going to summer school, the students who are struggling right now without getting proper guidance or help. So is there a way that we can work it out? Because I understand how important professional development is, but from now to June 30th, we still have a little over a month. So, I think $500,000, can go to help some really critical, students. I mean, the critical needs of the students right now. Yeah.
Ivy.
Thank you.
Yeah, Victoria's next.
Thank you. I think I had a question first. I think the committee already approved some amount of money for technology, if that's correct. I think, Debbie, you had mentioned that.
It wasn't an amount. It was if there were monies left over.
Okay. So then I think what had been presented to the school board was that students had already been monitored. We've done a good job of getting technology to students. Is there something right now that district management believes we do have a significant chunk of our students who over the last 2 months, contrary to what has been presented, we are missing with technology? Is there information showing that?
No, it is not about our needs currently. It is about when technology comes back in that has been home in people's houses for a number of months, what we are going to need to replace. We also, it's a constant kind of target that's in motion, because we've got some parents who are working from home and thereby needing their own device, and they can't give that device to their child. But now that shelter in place is starting to lift, they might go back to work and their child might be just fine. So it's a constant moving target. We were thinking of technology that would need to be replaced for broken Chromebooks, Chromebooks that just weren't functioning at this point, just because they've been not in our possession and we haven't been taking care of them.
Do we still have thousands of Chromebooks at sites that have not been checked out? I think my concern is that when we don't have school in place, and we know that technology kind of expires functionally, even though that shouldn't be a thing, it is. So that if we really should be exhausting all of the technology that we have, checking out the Chromebooks that we have, because buying new to check out new will leave those still expiring, kind of in their Chromebook sitting at schools. So what sort of tracking is being done at the district level on this?
Well, that is being done by IT. I couldn't speak to that with very much articulation because I haven't been a part of that process. We've just been giving numbers of students or families reaching out to instructional services back over to technology so that they could get them furnished with whatever they need to be successful at home.
And so far we've been able to keep up with that?
I believe so. I have not checked with Lucas Bogle on that recently. I certainly can. Steve, who's next?
Sorry, I'm having technology issues. Nishi is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to a little bit about the Chromebook thing, because in my experience, most of the Chromebook carts in our school or in my classes are unused on a daily basis. So especially right now, like I don't really see the point in trying to buy new Chromebooks when the ones that we already have aren't being put that much in use. And also going back to Ivy's point about how their students might have more immediate needs that are unfulfilled. Surf 4D recently did like a distance learning survey where we found that like only 73% of elementary schoolers felt that they can complete schoolwork based on their individual circumstances. And I know 73 is like a high percentage, but I still feel like that's pretty low considering that we want all of our students to be able to fulfill like their daily coursework. So I was wondering if like LCAAC could work that into their funds right now, considering things like books aren't an immediate necessity.
So do you have a suggestion for that for how to, did the survey yield any kind of feedback about what elementary school students are needing?
Wait, I'll just link the survey right now in the chat. We didn't really garner that much specific, like feedback. And I also cannot confirm that this reached everybody who wasn't able to access, the things that they need. But I feel like things like printers or just things that they might need on their daily basis that they don't have access to. I don't think I can come up with like a specific object to spend our money on that would help, but I think that would just require some like extra research and outreach.
Thank you, Nishi. Steve?
Next up is Twisha Mehta.
Yeah, so my question was, we had earmarked for professional development. Is there any professional development that can be achieved, with keeping distance learning in mind? Or for that matter, is there an alternate proposal on how do we use that money? I think that would be a more fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Twisha. We were thinking of technology. Technology doesn't just have to come in the form of Chromebooks. I think Nishi brings up a really relevant idea that it can come in the form of printers or what we are lacking for any student, not just elementary age students. Technology can also come in the form of licensing. Something that was brought to LCAAC in February was the ongoing expense of Lexia and how we don't have any money earmarked for Lexia in next year's plan, but we can purchase the licensing with some of that surplus money for next year now. And that helps our students K-12. There's also the idea of, because we know that FUSD is in a budget crisis in terms of monies that we're having to find budget balancing solutions still. That was prior to us going into school closure and COVID-19. Those expenditures for COVID-19 we're not going to know the true essence of how that's going to impact our district until after the May revise came out and the amount of COLA that the state was going to fund for employees. We also have a 0.56 COLA. Has that been settled, Victoria? Did you say yes?
It's going up for a vote on Wednesday.
Okay, so it's going up for a vote on Wednesday for FEDTA to ratify a 0.56. If that moves forward, then our other bargaining units will also yield the same result. So that's another expenditure that is coming to us. Having said all of that, we could also take that $500,000 and use it to pay for $500,000 of Kennedy's block schedule this year. We have earmarked monies to cover some of Kennedy's block schedule for next year's LCAP, but there's nothing saying that we can't line item $500,000 worth of Kennedy's block schedule this year, thereby alleviating the general fund by $500,000. That would be meeting the needs of our unduplicated students and alleviating the general fund for another expenditure it might incur because of COVID-19. So I just wanted to throw a couple of ideas out there, food for thought, as Twisha had recommended. And then I'll go back to Steve to call on hands.
And next is Joyce Ricard.
I wanted to add one more thing about technology as it relates to this pot of money. There's a whole group of educators at FUSD that are currently they haven't been identified as even having the technology to be part of teaching with their teacher, mainly paraeducators. We haven't even been able to identify and support those educators with technology to help support our students. So So this technology issue might not just be about Chromebooks for students, or it might be about the educators who right now currently aren't reaching our students because of the lack of technology. So I wanted to kind of add that in. It's not just Chromebooks, it's making sure all of our educators are reaching all of our students. And right now, us paraeducators are not all reaching our students. So.
Thank you, Joyce. Steve?
Next is Armina Farid.
Hi. So I also wanted to suggest, maybe allocating some amount or considering for students who need a little bit more attention, like English learners, what actually we are doing with them, like providing some, because I'm sure they must be struggling a little bit more because of the language issue. So like apps or bilingual books, or the teachers, how they're reaching out or suggesting some, some ways to to consider this obstacle in right now, because they're not in consultation with the people in the school, or the principals, or the consultants who come and teach them or help them. So like, is there something we can do for them?
Steve, I'm going to ask you to go to Christy next. Christy can respond to Armina's question, and then she also had her hand up, so you can just go next in the queue.
Yeah, so as far as English learners, we have developed a district plan, and that has all been provided to our staff. We've also done professional development, and I've shared with Armina kind of our plan on that. But I do think, going back to the technology, and I'm glad Joyce mentioned this too, technology is not just intended for our students. We have a big need, and so I'm glad Joyce brought that up, because we do have staff members who are wanting to support our students, but don't have access to any type of technology, or in the sense that they don't have cameras. And as we all know, in our meeting right now, that's how we're kind of surviving, right? Is having this discourse and being able to kind of have that simulation of what it would be like in a classroom. So in that aspect, I think that's an important thing to think about. For English learners and for some of our families who don't have access to technology, in the sense of having hotspots, maybe something to look at. Again, technology is very broad, and it doesn't need to just be some type of Chromebook, but thinking about other devices. I know families, because my staff has interacted with them, that their internet is pretty spotty. And so some of them need adapters and Ethernets and connectors. So that would really help, and that might be something to consider. In regards to the student level, I know that there's been reference that some people have said there are Chromebooks that are left at certain sites, but I also want to remember that our high need schools, that is not the case. A lot of their Chromebooks have all been checked out. And so we don't know, as Debbie has mentioned, what the technology will look like when they come back. And if we are still kind of in a distance learning model, we have to also think about the cleaning of these Chromebooks. And I know there's been at the task force discussion about possibly, do we need to go one-on-one? So especially like at secondary, if each student has been given a Chromebook, then there's not this, for lack of better words, access to germs and things like that, where you take, it's almost like a textbook and you bring it with you to each of your classes. So these are just some things, kind of food for thought, of what I've heard from teachers and administrators and paraeducators and others about there is a greater need of technology, and it doesn't need to be just limited to Chromebooks for students. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Next is Ann Crosby.
So before Trustee Crosby goes, we have about 15 minutes left before we need to take a vote and make a decision. So I just wanted to put that out there as food for thought, because we could probably talk about this for every amount of people who are in the room right now, we could probably talk about this for the rest of the evening. But let's kind of keep the time check in mind. Trustee Crosby, you're on mute.
Sorry. I just had a question about the Chromebooks that are at our school sites that were mentioned by Victoria. Do they have cameras? I know we have had many teachers who have computers that the district provided that don't have cameras, hence why we had to purchase a lot more computers due to our situation. And so that's, I guess, my other question.
Yeah, we do have multiple generations of Chromebooks in the field right now. And so there's just going to be a natural age out anyway for some of these things. And it's probably going to be expanded on even or emphasized even more as a need because they've probably taken on more wear and tear than they would have if they'd been kept at school in a Chrome cart locked up. I know my laptop has.
Right. No, I was just thinking in terms of Victoria's comment about computers that are at school sites that aren't utilized. If they don't have cameras, they may not be able to be utilized for distance. But if they do, absolutely, I think we should be cycling those out.
Yeah, I do too. And I haven't heard in all of the updates that we've gotten from technology, I haven't heard that there are several hundred Chromebooks just sitting at a site being unused for no reason at all. But maybe, like you said, they might be a generation so old that they can't be useful in the field. So
it's probably a worthwhile thing for us to.
Yeah. Steve?
Next is Victoria Burbeck-Herrera.
So for expedience sake, I want to start making motions here so we can kind of speed things along. If I can get clarification from Debbie as chair, this committee has already voted that at the end of everything, we would consider the technology the district management might use so that we don't need to revisit that. So the motion that I would like to start with is to request district management utilize all appropriate existing technology for checkout for students and staff, all educators, paraprofessionals, before utilizing LCAAC funds for this purpose. So that would be my first motion if there is a second.
I'm trying to think through that motion because
well, you said you can't imagine that there are hundreds sitting out there, and having worked at sites and seeing some varying organizational systems and things being what they are with the chaos, I guarantee you that there are sites that have Chromebooks that would be appropriate. And I think that it's important to make that happen, hence my motion.
I don't know if that part of the motion needs to be in the LCAAC arena. I think the motion can be about what we're going to authorize the funds for, but not directing.
I just a point of order. I don't want to get back and forth with. So for my motion, because it sounds like district management is bringing to us a technology recommendation with no data. So I don't think that the committee doesn't need to revisit. We already have a standing motion on the floor that you already have authorization to do that. So that wouldn't have required the emergency meeting today. If that additional money had fallen to the bottom line, then we had already taken that position. So,
well, the emergency meeting today, Victoria, is because there's a huge change in the agreement that this committee had come to as far as a recommendation. So I didn't think it would be prudent to take $500,000 earmarked for the professional development day and say, just because we had voted on this in February or March, moving forward with technology being an okay expenditure, to not bring the group back together and be as transparent as possible. So that's really the purpose of the meeting today.
I absolutely appreciate that. And I have another motion I'd like to make afterwards. So again, my request is to just uphold our standing committee recommendation to allow the remaining monies after we have our other items, just as we had already intended. But with the request that district management utilize all existing technologies right now on hand at sites.
Is there a second for Victoria's motion?
Michael will second.
Okay, the motion is on the floor. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand so Victoria can take the minutes.
Okay.
Any opposed? Do we need this number in the minutes or the names in the minutes, Victoria?
I only have myself, Michael, and Ivy as having raised hands. And I'm not sure if Ivy was just previously still has her hand from wanting to ask a question, but I also, yeah, so maybe we can start over again, because I don't know if the majority of people were just going to abstain, which is totally possible.
Okay. So we have the motion on the floor from Victoria and a second by Michael. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand physically.
Okay.
Any opposed? Please raise your hand. Any abstained? Please raise your hand.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Steve?
I'm sorry, I still had another.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So
can you, I'm sorry, excuse me. Can you please report out what happened with the motion? Did it fail? It's that in committee?
Motion failed.
What happened? The motion, okay.
Yes, the motion failed.
Carries. I had more in favor and no one opposed. So the motion carries.
Okay.
Motion carries because everybody abstained from it?
Correct.
I'm sorry?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking as well.
I'd ask that we just take a minute to review the bylaws to find out what the stated policy is on votes.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, Victoria, go ahead and go on with your next motion.
So my motion would be to utilize the approximately $500,000 first for approximately, I think it was 225,000, and perhaps Debbie, you recall what we approved it for last time for that apportionment for the Kennedy Block program.
It was 290.
Okay, so that we would spend the 28% of the cost of the Kennedy Block program.
Okay. So the motion is to earmark 290,000 of the 500,000, dropping to the bottom line, to offset the general fund expenditure of Kennedy's block schedule for 1920. Is there a second?
Michael will second.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, all those in favor?
Okay, I have 9.
Okay. Do we need to take the numbers for who is not in favor? I don't think we have that many more voting members.
Can I just say something?
Yes, Ivy.
Okay, so this is for 2019-20. So it's 2019 for the current year.
Yes, this
okay,
year.
Then I'll be fine with that. Okay.
Okay.
Point of
please
procedure.
report out the the results of the vote, please?
The motion carries. Trustee Campbell?
Point of procedure on the previous vote.
Yes.
I reviewed the bylaws on Article 6 under meetings. If you look under H, it says all decisions of the committee shall be made by a majority vote, provided that a quorum is present. And majority vote isn't defined here, but in Robert's rules, it is 50% plus 1 of voting members at the meeting. So if I'm understanding correctly, that would mean the previous motion did not pass.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so out of the 500,000 right now, we have approximately 200,000 left that we need to make a motion toward. Right now, we have technology written into our vote from February for surplus monies. So we can leave it at that and finish our evening. So it would be $290,000 be earmarked toward Kennedy and $200,000 be earmarked toward technology.
Sorry, I still had another motion, but if it's the pleasure of the chair to rotate if there are other people raising their hands.
So Steve, can you go to the participation list and see who has a hand raised?
Sure. Current hands up. There's 3 in order that I see it is Ivy Wu, Christy Rocha, and Trisha Mehta.
Okay, so I just feel that we need to be creative about how we use technology. If we cannot get one, and also, as I mentioned earlier, professional development is very important. Teaching our teachers how to use technology, or our staff how to use technology to help the students is going to be very important. And then with the many tutors we're working with right now, there's some students who are really, really savvy. And there are also community partners who are willing to support right now. So instead of I'm just thinking, instead of having a group, a huge group of professional development for a large group of people, we can probably break it down into smaller groups with different people. They don't have to be paid. I mean, a lot of people who are savvy with technology are not necessarily, they're doing this just out of their, their interest, their care for the community. So I think we can be more creative about how to help our staff, help all our employees develop technology skills, and so that they can in turn help other people.
Thank you, Ivy. Steve?
Next up was Trisha Mehta.
So I just wanted to clarify, does technology include the licensing for Lexia, or is that separate?
It can, absolutely. Technology encompasses all of that. So we could, Kim Kelly, what is 1 year's subscription licensing for Lexia?
Let me look it up and I'll get back to you.
Plus?
Yes, let me look it up. I've got it on a document. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Perfect. In regards to distance learning, Twisha, you're bringing up a good point. Lexia we've really fallen back on it this year a lot more than we had previously in terms of overarching the entire district. It's been really supportive of both teachers and students. So that's definitely something that we can earmark that money toward.
Right. I'm not just talking about specifically for Lexia. I don't know if you have enough time to understand what licensing do we need, but can we just use it towards licensing that supports the distance learning model? Because most likely we might just have a recurrence of this thing, and then we might have to go fall back on that again.
Yeah. Are you making a motion, Twisha?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you repeat the motion one more time so we can see if we have a second?
The motion is to use the remaining of the 500, that's what, 300K?
200,000.
To spend towards any technology that supports distance learning model, be it Lexia or anything else as needed.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Anna Shipper seconds.
Anna seconds. So we have the motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hands.
Sorry, You still had some people in the queue who wanted to speak before you make take the vote.
Oh,
Okay, I had people in the queue and Victoria had made her motions, but we can go ahead and go back to that. Please remember your motion, okay, Twisha, and we'll come back to it.
And to clarify, because the chair doesn't need to do that, if people were previously in the queue, it was about a different item. So it does pause and the chair is in order unless people make it clear they wanted to speak specifically about that motion. Otherwise, the previous queue dies.
Does anybody want to speak specifically that's in the queue currently? I see Victoria, Ivy, Ann, Dee, and Christy are in the queue. Do any of those people want to talk specifically about Twisha's motion? Okay, Ann?
Can we please have the motion be repeated?
Absolutely. Twisha?
Okay, motion is to spend the remaining 200,000 on purchasing licenses for any of the technology that would help aid in distance learning, be it Lexia or anything else.
So if I'm understanding your motion correctly, Twisha, it is just for licenses. It's not for equipment.
We could make it licensing equipment, whatever is to favor distance learning.
I would